Alright, and welcome back to Make It So, Adventures in Spacecraft. This is episode 3 of our series on making molds of existing minis in order to make copies of those miniatures. In the first episode, we prepared our mold by building a box, laying in clay, like so. This clay here, we put in our miniatures. In this case, it was accessories. It was a sword, a flail, a ring of fire, and a goblet from Demon Blade Miniatures series called Rumble in Antarctica, based on the characters from the rock band GWAR. We placed them in and poured in a first layer of our high temperature silicone. That is Smooth-On's Mold Max 60. It's designed for high temperatures, so you can use pewter. I'm going to be doing test casts with resin in this episode, but hopefully in a future episode I'll show some of the pewter casting process as well. In the second episode, we broke the box apart, took out that first half of the mold, removed the pieces from the clay, and then reseated them with the original half of the mold seated down face up and made sure that the new pieces were in there, along with all of the wires that we put in for vents and the sprue that we did for our primary channel. And then we poured a second layer of silicone on the top of that after putting down a release mechanism, or a release material. In this case, it was petroleum jelly. So now what we're going to do is remove the box again, hopefully be able to separate the mold into its two constituent halves. And then we'll very carefully inspect it to make sure that all the channels are nice and clear. We'll use a hobby knife and tweezers and some other tools to make sure that those channels will allow for our material to flow through. We'll cut some holes in the top to allow it to vent and to allow us to pour the material in. And then we're going to do a test cast with quick cast polyurethane casting resin that I picked up from Tap Plastics years ago. This is a relatively quick curing resin. It should cure in about 15 minutes or so. So with any luck, we should be able to show some of the results of that. So without further ado, I'm going to remove and separate the box from our surface here, and we'll prep it. Before I do that, in the last episode I had mentioned I like to save the casting cup or the mixing cup that I used for the silicone, just to make sure that everything was mixed well and that this is cured fully. This has been over 24 hours since I poured the last silicone in, so this stuff should be nice and cured, and you can see it's peeling away from the edges of the cup nice and cleanly. You can see just how tough this stuff is. It really stretches nicely, but it returns to its original shape, and it picks up detail extremely well. In fact, I'm able to pull it out almost perfectly clearly, and you can see that it's picked up the solo and other details from the bottom of the cup very, very nicely. It's slightly gummy just around the edges there. Those edges didn't get mixed 100% perfectly, but it looks like all the rest of it did, so I've got a good chance that the mold itself is going to hold up pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this away along with the cup itself. It served its purpose, and there's not much use left for that. And now I can use the same chisel blade that I used before to separate this from the base. Just cutting away the hot glue. And it just scrapes right up. And then to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to try using this tool. This is a palette knife, but I've also used this a lot for separating prints from a 3D printer bed. I'm going to slide this underneath and just kind of lift, and there it goes. Just like that. Come on. A little bit of hot glue on the far side there, still sticking it down. I'm going to use the chisel blade to just slide in and cut that free. And it should tear right up. And I'll just use the chisel blade here to scrape up any additional hot glue so that we get back to a nice flat surface that we can work with. There we go. Much better. Good. So with my hobby knife, I'm going to cut down the corner here. You'll remember I put a lot of hot glue down that edge to make sure that there was no leaks, which worked well, and it looks like that there was no issue with leaks. And this time I'm not worried about this, preserving the state of the walls here. They've done their job, and they are designed to be disposable. I'm going to go ahead and rip those free. And now, the real moment of truth. Did the mold release agent do its job, and will I be able to separate these? I can see a little bit of the silicone, or the petroleum jelly still sticking out. It's likely, especially in the corners, that I'm going to have to use a knife to at least get it started. And in fact, I'm going to kind of trim away a little bit of the corner here, just because we got some flashing that leaked into the corners. It tried to leak out where we put the hot glue. Just going to round those off just a little bit and take off some of the flashing on here. Just like so. Nice and clean. That looks good. And good. That's going to let it sit nice and flat, give us a good flat surface to work with. Move that over there and throw it away here in a minute. And now, can I get this apart? Oop. I can already feel it separating a little bit. That's a very good sign. It's kind of stuck in the corner there, so I'm just going to free the corner up with my blade a little bit, just to give it a little bit of purchase and start. But you can see it's already starting to split nicely right where I want it to. So that petroleum jelly does appear to have done its job for the most part. The corners that I couldn't get into super well with the cotton swab I was using are still a little bit stuck, but they'll free with just a little bit of force. Alright, I'm going to go to the... I don't want to force it too much because I don't actually want to tear it. I just want to separate the two halves where they were poured together. And for the most part, it seems to be cooperating, but in some cases it's not. So let's use this palette knife. Just kind of run it along there, see if I can find where the two edges are bonded. I can see a little bit of that petroleum jelly there, so I'm going to go in there. I'm just looking for anywhere I can get a decent grip to get it to separate. And this silicone, more than some others I've found, likes to really bond to itself, even if you've let it cure enough. Come on. Oh, there it goes there. That's a good sign. Just kind of run your fingernail along the edge. Just kind of forcing it without forcing it, because you, again, don't want to tear it. You want it to split cleanly, but I can't really see exactly where that edge was, so I can't run my knife along it to coax it. So you just want to be careful. Let it do its own thing. But I can already split it this far, and I can see that the registers that I cut in there look very good. I see a lot of nice mimicked detail, and I can already see the flail and the wires. Just keep splitting it carefully, because I don't want to break it. There's another register that I cut in. We're almost done on this half. Alright, so this is going to be the bottom of the mold. Oh. There it goes. Now it's starting to give. I don't want to force it now, because this is when you could really do some damage to it if you're not careful. Just like that. Almost there. Looking good. There we go. Now, all we have to do is free the original masterpieces and the wire. I'm going to take my tweezers. Where did I? Oh, I've got these guys right here. And pull out each of these pieces of wire. And I'm going to try to hold this up to the light so you can see the quality of the impression of the mold. It's actually got a very nice amount of detail. You can see the individual spikes and the chain pattern on the mold itself. Got a little excess petroleum jelly there, and that might give us a little bit of problem. But some of these channels look nice and deep. You can see the ring of fire here. You can see the sword here. It's pretty shallow on this side, but it's much deeper on the other side. So we're just going to go. Oop, I guess those just live on the floor now. I'm going to pull out our sprue that we were using for our primary channel. Pull out the goblet. All these little bits of wire. Kusmu's hanging out. It is addictive. This is addictive. It's very satisfying to get a very good pull from a mold. We're still not totally finished. There's some additional cleanup we're going to need to do. The wires that we used for our flow channels didn't make perfect contact, so a lot of where they terminate up against the edge of the master, we're going to want to clean up a little bit and make sure that material can flow through. But the important part is that we captured as much detail as possible in a way that is going to allow us to pour our material in and hopefully get a nice copy of each of these pieces. All right, a couple more wires on this half. There we go. And one more. And then we have the ring of fire has already started to separate from the mold itself, which is good. That looks great. I don't see a whole lot of bubbles along there. I see a little bit of a seam, like it raised or wasn't quite perfectly seated on the backside that wasn't on the original. So the copies that we'll get from this mold, if nothing else, those would be sort of telltales of the fact that this is a copy and not the original. But that's all right. I'll hold it up to the camera here in just a moment so you can get a better view. You clean this out. Take out the flail or mace. And there we go. All right, so I'll hold this up so you can see. I don't know how well the telltale is going to show up. It's right along the top of the flames. You can see a little bit of a lip right here and here, and a couple of bubbles that formed right there that'll actually create little bumps or warts on the flame. Those, if they come through on the copy, you can actually sort of sand them down and smooth them out. And even this you could probably file down a little bit. But you can even see the detail that you get on the chain here looks really nice. It came through very well. So I'm very happy with the result that we got. Now, on the previous episode, we cut these holes out of here to act as registers to make sure that this locks together. And you can see when I put this back together and try to slide it around, for the most part, it grips pretty well. It's not going to slide around, and the two halves should have very minimal flashing along the sides. This side doesn't have a whole lot of registers cut, but it's a pretty uneven surface in general, so it's not going to be too bad. So now we do some inspection. First and foremost is, where are we going to be putting our material in? And I can see, since we're going to be pouring it in the top here, It's going to need to flow here to get down into the sword. It's going to need to come over here and down here to get into the flail. And then it's going to need to come in here and there to get into the ring of fire. So I think that keeping it just off center from the flail, well, maybe even a little bit over here, like right above this bit, is going to be our primary pouring spout. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut part of that in. And it's not going to be super big yet, but we'll widen it as we go. I'll make it just a little bit bigger now on this half, and then we'll put the two halves together to make sure that we line it up. Again, it's not super critical that these are a perfect match, because this is going to be part of the castaway from the mold that we're making. And then I'm going to deepen this channel just a little bit, because we've got a little extra void there, just to make sure that we're getting lots of material flowing through. And then second half right here. So can I fix the mold at this stage? That's a good. So first question was, what'll be the material? So with this with this mold, since it's a high temperature mold, I can use pewter or resin. I've got a quick cast polyurethane casting resin that I'm going to use as my initial test, and that's the same one that I did with this guy here, one of my failed minis from one of my previous tests. I've got a pressure pot coming, hopefully at the end of this week, that should allow me to get some better tests there, and help force a lot of the resin in and cause a lot of the bubbles that may be still trapped in there to collapse. In terms of fixing the mold at this stage, there's not a whole lot I can do. I don't trust my ability to cut silicone that accurately to be able to recapture that detail. I mean, silicone is a very tough material, and it just doesn't cut delicately the way that I would need to. There are things that I could have done in the previous stages, like use a pressure pot or a vacuum chamber to eliminate some of the bubbles. But I'm happy enough with the results. I'm not looking for 100% perfection from this one. And this, I'm certainly not trying to do this at an expert scale or quality. I just want it good enough for my own collection. And the results that we'll get here, and the copies that we end up making, should be nice enough that I can fix any of those with a knife or with a file or two. All right, so I've got my primary pouring spout set up right there, and you can see it's pretty decent. It goes right down into that section. I'm also going to cut a couple more little smaller vents over here and over here, so that as the mold fills, any air has avenues to escape out here without having to back up all the way through the primary spout and give them more opportunities to get stuck. So I can see that the primary channel goes all the way over to here, so I'm just going to cut a fairly small hole there. And those also sort of act as indicators when you're filling the mold that you're getting pretty close to capacity. Once those things start, you see stuff starting to backfill back out. And I'm just going to cut away a little more of that channel, make sure that air can escape. Yeah, in terms of like trying to fill in the bubbles or anything, not really. It's already got a lot of mold release agent. Theoretically, technically, you might be able to. I've never tried. I'd be curious if other folks out there have. I put this up on YouTube later, so if people have experience repairing molds, I'd love to hear about it. Leave it in the comments below. All right, so that's going to do our primary channel and pouring spout. So now I just need to kind of follow along each of the different vents that we've got here and make sure that there's plenty of access for the resin to enter each of the parts that we want to fill. To do that, I'm just going to cut away little tiny bits. Use the tweezers to pull away excess material, excess silicone. Yeah, like right there to get into the handle of the mace or the flail. There's just not a good spot, so I need to cut away this little bit of silicone. I'm going to try to make sure I do this on both sides. So I'm going to go one spot at a time and then go to the other side to make sure I'm not forgetting or missing any key bits. So I'm looking for the handle of the flail, which is right here. Yep, and that would have been a problem. So just cut this little bit away. Use the tweezers to pull it out. Very gently, because I don't want to pull away any important bits. And I can already see, I don't know how well that's coming through, but this is a nice deep channel, and this one's real shallow with a little bit of a wall there too. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that free to make sure that nothing's impeding the flow of resin or pewter getting in or air getting out, because the last thing you want in a mold is air getting trapped, and you end up with, you know, guys like this with, you know, an axe missing or horns that are just stubbed off and too short. You know, after all this hard work, you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the best chance for success that you can get. Okay, so that looks good there. And that's the tree that goes down into the... Goes down into the flail. Have a little more of that away. And then we've got this part that goes around the corner to the, or the spike to the flail. I'm going to cut a little bit of that away to make sure it flows well. And then into the spike. Cut a tiny bit of that one away. I'm going to be real careful on there because it's going onto a pretty detailed piece. Compare that to this half, which would be right there. Yep, same bit. Nice and gently, just cleaning up all the little bits. And you're just kind of following it with your eyes, looking for anywhere where it doesn't look like it would flow through. You know, think about it like a plumber, or like if you were rolling tiny marbles through here, where would they get stuck? Because you want a nice, even flow, especially with something like pewter, where you really don't have much working time. You know, you're talking seconds before it starts cooling and hardening and stuff. It's if the air's going to get out, it's got to do it fairly quickly. The material's got to be able to flow through nice and smoothly. So what is that? Sometimes it can help to just refer back to your original as well. Okay, so that is a vent that is supposed to go to one of these spikes. And actually, I don't want that to get cut out because it's cut out perfectly right there. Good. I hope. Well, next, let's go over to the sword. And I can definitely see that there's not enough contact there for the material to flow through. I know this is probably not the most riveting, entertaining bit of watching somebody cut away details that you can't quite see on this poorly focused 1080p webcam, but it's a important stage if I'm going to get decent results from this work. The bottom of the sword, I'm actually going to cut off quite a big section to make sure that we can get material in. because I know that the handle that was on there was actually slightly longer than it was needed for the original model. It would actually need to get shaved off a little bit so I can afford a little bit bigger of a well there. I'm going to cut away a little bit more there to make sure that we've got lots of material going in. Use the tweezers. I still have my doubts about how well that sword's going to come out. It's so thin, so narrow, that even if it does come out, if I'm pouring it in resin, it's going to be so brittle. Very carefully cut this little bit away. And this little bit away so we can flow to the tip of that flame. Make sure the bubbles can escape. Got more down here. At this tip of the flame. So this, basically, the resin's going to flow through here down into the flame, as well as hopefully over here and down into the flame and around. And we've got these vents here that are basically going to allow it to flood all the way down and hopefully carry any air out this way and up out to the secondary vent that we cut over there. All right, next. That's where we put that little itty bitty piece of wire, and it looks like it did stay a lot more in place than I thought it was going to when I was putting in prepping the second half of the mold. It really didn't want to stay put, but it seems to have played ball, which is nice. This is where the two wires joined. There's a little bit of stuff gathered there. Make sure that we clean this side of that same mold. That's here. Oh yeah, that would have caused a lot of problem. So we're basically just carving out the area for our new sprue. None of this is actually going to show up on the model itself. These are parts that we'll cut away. Just like if you get a model kit, all of the pieces are attached to the big runner that goes around, and that's just sprue that's designed to allow the material to flow through to the actual critical parts. And we're just sort of replicating that process. It's a lot thinner, so we're going to have to really cross our fingers and hope this works. Again, I've got a pressure pot coming that I'll do hopefully be able to do a video or two on how it works. But the point of that is you put you pour your material in and then pressurize the chamber that it's in up to I think around 30 30 to 40 psi, and that forces any of the air that is still trapped in there to collapse down to basically microscopic size and helps push the material all the way through the mold. That works really well especially if you're doing clear resins. You can get stuff that looks crystal clear by using a pressure pot. It's not a tool I've ever used before yet, but I'm looking forward to getting my hands on one. I've got a compressor for my airbrush that I should be able to just hook right up. I say should because I believe it's going to require a little bit of modification, but I'm not the first person to do this, and there's plenty of information out there, and it's not exactly the world's most complicated process. You're filling a tank full of air. You do want to make sure you do know what you're doing, because if you don't, you could also be making a bomb in your own house, which I do not recommend anybody do. Call me crazy, but creating explosives in a contained environment in your place of residence strikes me as a fool's errand. All right. So I'm just going to literally trace the path of this resin and see if there's any other areas. Yep, I see one right there that are going to need a little extra love. Now, since this is all sprue, it's stuff that's going to be thrown away. It's okay if the pathway is a little bit ugly. Better to be ugly and open than look nice and not work. Man, this stuff is tricky to cut because it's so tough that even a tiny little bit that doesn't get uncut will still hold it pretty dang firmly in place. Open up this guy a little bit more because it's a pretty tough corner for the resin to make anyway. Tweezers to pull away the excess, the scrap. It comes in here, widen that little spot. Flows in, flows down, flows across and down, through here into the mace, and here into the waist. That's good. That looks pretty good. I'm going to widen that up a little bit. Just a hair. It's right at the tip of this hilt of the sword. Make sure that it can flow through. Real careful there because that's a pretty fine little detail that would be a shame to lose. Let's see. Not bad. It looks like that should be able to escape there. Oh, I didn't check for the pathway to the goblet. I am glad I took that last check. Because otherwise, this tricky little spot probably would not have filled. Cut away a little bit there. Go back to this side. That's right here. I don't want to do too much because I don't want to give myself a whole lot of cleanup to do on the cast parts. But I am seeing some real nice detail on some of the little interior bits here. So, assuming this works and it actually flows through, it looks like it's captured all the detail we wanted from the originals. Or at least quite a bit of it. But you never really know until you get your first pull from it, or second or third, and have had a chance to really test it out, find what's working and what's not, and do a little bit of repair. But you do want to be careful because it is way easier to remove silicone than it is to put it back if you needed it there. Oh, that's a section that definitely needs to be removed to allow nice clean flow. Come on. All right. Don't get impatient like I am definitely feeling right now. I want to get to the fun part. But there's work to do. Come on. There we go. I want to make sure you get all the extra little bits that you've cut off out of here too. Sometimes they'll kind of stick in there and they can either clog up or get actually trapped in your cast piece, which nobody needs. A little bit of extra clay in there. Just cleaning up. Just cleaning up. Oh, that vent needs to get opened. Just a little. think that might do it. Let me make sure this is nice and open here too, so we can get it to the top of the flame like that, and right there. A little bit of clay. What is that piece? I don't think that's going to flow at all. All right. That's feeling pretty good. I'm going to call it. We'll do a first cast. We can always do more, hopefully. So, we're going to prep our workspace to do our first pour, our first test cast. So there's a couple of things that we're going to need for that. First, a clean place to work. I'm going to move the originals over here so that they don't get lost, especially since these are for a commission and they don't actually belong to me. I'm going to make sure that they don't get mixed back into the with the rest of the originals though, because they need to get cleaned up. Kusmu asks, will the silicone degrade after many castings? It will. You know, it'll begin to fail, especially with the if I'm using it for pewter or other high temperature materials, it'll definitely take its toll. But even with silicone, some of it'll get stuck in there and cause it to degrade. I can probably get a couple dozen pulls from this with the Spaceship 2-part mold that I did. It's already started to degrade. I've managed to get about 10, maybe 11 pulls from it, most of which were successful. And I might be able to get another half dozen or so out of it. So, you know, for industrial molds, they're made out of steel or other like extremely strong material, and they're also made to frequently they'll be heated to make sure that the material flows through, and frequently will be put into centrifuges and things like that to force the material to flow through, or will be put under extremely high pressure to make sure that the materials flow through. This is just sort of hobbyist grade and not intended for real long-term. In order to pour our cast, we want to make sure that this is held together well. You can use rubber bands, things like that. I pre-cut a couple pieces of very thin plywood that are just about the same size as my mold. The mold is 4.5 by 2.5. This is 2 by 4 little piece of plywood, and I'm just going to use a couple of clamps that still have some pewter stuck to them from doing high temperature casting. I like to use the plywood here because it minimizes some of the distress that the mold will be put under. You don't want to put it under so much sort of squeezing force with clamps and stuff that it would cause it to distort your mold. You just want enough to really hold it together well. And clamps like this will work well, but the plywood helps make sure that force is spread across the entire thing. Now, I'm not going to need a whole lot of silicone, but anytime I'm pouring resin, I like to have an additional mold on standby that I can use for any excess that I have. So I can always, make some extra parts. This is a 1-part mold that I made out of a platinum silicone. This stuff's extremely, extremely flexible. And it just happened to be, it's probably, well, it's definitely way overkill for the application that I was using it for. This would normally be for a really, really high quality and high detail mold. And this stuff will last a really long time. It's very strong and extremely flexible. You can see it's just like jello, but it's very hard to tear. And it's really thick because I had a couple pieces here that were fairly thick. But it was what I had on hand when I was trying to make some of these things. And it was resin or silicones and resins won't last forever before they get mixed. And this stuff I'd had for a couple of years and was getting pretty close to kicking, so it wasn't going to be good anymore. So I just used it for this, and I didn't have a higher quality use for it, so might as well use it. I made for this. I made copies of a bunch of these, like some diamond plate. Metal and these sort of blast doors and tires and barrels and general sort of bric-a-brac you'd see on a sci-fi battlefield. These are all from various Games Workshop model kits. And I was building a big terrain piece and had like one or two of each of these, but I wanted a lot of them to be able to embed them into the ground or to make additional scatter terrain and stuff like that. So rather than use up my only pieces for that, I made a mold and then used the casting or the quick cast resin here to make some extras. This resin that we're going to be using is a 1-to-1, so it's you mix equal parts. I've got pre-measured cups here, and I'm going to mix about an ounce. Yeah, 2 ounces should be well more than enough to fill this and still get some extra parts out of this. I don't need a lot of extra parts. I already have a lot of those, but that way I'll have those. So I'll mix about 1 ounce of each and then pour them into a separate cup. I've got a mixing cup here, and I'm actually going to cut the top of it down a little bit because it'll make it easier to stir, and I really don't need a 16 ounce 12 ounce cup, so I'm just going to cut it down a little bit to make it easier to work with. That'll actually make it easier to pour out of as well. This silicone has a working time of about 3 to 5 minutes, and then a cure time of 15 minutes to half an hour. It should say on here actually. Does it have instructions on? It only tends to only put instructions on one side, and it'll put, yeah. So it's mix thoroughly for 10 to 15 seconds. The product will begin to gel in 3 to 4 minutes. So you want to have everything prepared before you go to work on it. I'm going to try using this stuff with the pressure pot, but I don't know if the pressure pot will work fast enough to or to fill fast enough to be super effective. It'll be better for things like art resin and things like that, the clearer resins that cure over 24 hours, where you just basically fill the pot and let it sit overnight. All right. Also want to make sure you've got gloves handy because this stuff can be pretty messy. So another trick you can use, resins will tend to flow a little bit more smoothly and release a lot of any trap bubbles that they have when they're warmer. It's actually pretty warm down here already. It's like 75, almost 80 degrees. But you can soak them in a hot water bath, 90 to 100 degrees or so, to help thin them before you start pouring. And that will give you some better results. Okay, this one wants to open nicely, so part B, you're going first. You know, I'm just going to go straight to 1.5 ounces. I've had this stuff a while. It's already... Whoa! Don't do that. I'll grab some paper towels and wipe up all this excess. It's okay. It's not going to hurt anything because it hasn't been mixed with its catalyst component. So, clean up a little bit of mess. No problem. So one of the things with the quick cast stuff here too is that you don't want to leave it in the mold too long. It can actually shorten the mold life. It can start extracting some of the natural sort of flexibility from the mold. The parts will actually begin to get more brittle over time as well, as it cures and hardens, so it can be harder to release them. After about 15 minutes or so, they'll still be somewhat soft, somewhat flexible, but will allow you to pull them out without shattering. So you can always kind of reset them. When I was making a bunch of pieces in this mold, I used that to my advantage and pulled them out after about 12 minutes, and they were still fairly soft, and I could actually sort of, on this big terrain board I was building, I could kind of press them in, and they would take the contour of the ground like they'd been there forever and sort of driven over a bunch of times and really stuck and taken the shape of the terrain. I put them along the bottom of a creek and things like that, and that actually worked in my favor. Oof, I'm gonna go find a motivator to open this guy. I'll be right back. Alright, there we go. Like they say, if at first you don't succeed, grab a bigger tool. That's the ticket. Come on. This guy's been used a few times. Gotten a little bit crusted on. But it's nothing a little additional force can't fix. So we want 1.5 ounces of this stuff, and to not spill it all over our work surface again, you know, take the novel approach. Set that aside. Got a stirring stick and a backup stirring stick in case I bust one, like a big old chumpus. All right, so I'm going to stir this for 30 seconds, and then I'm going to start pouring it in. So let's have our digital assistant give us a hand. Alexa, set a timer for 30 seconds.
30 seconds, starting now.
All right, so you really want to scrape along the walls, just really agitate it. Just do your best to, you know, stir vigorously without introducing bubbles as much as possible, which is kind of contradictory, but this takes a little technique. Not that I have mastered that by any means whatsoever. Alexa, stop. All right, so that looks okay. I'm going to pour a little bit in here just to kind of get a feel for it. I'm going to pour half a barrel. Oops. Yeah, that's going to be a tricky one. Scrape that off. All right, here we go into our brand new mold. I can already feel this stuff starting to warm up. This stuff does not go slowly. So just pour it in. It's okay if it spills down the side. Keep going. I can already see it starting to come up here. Agitate it around to really help coax it through. Come on. Yep, I can see it starting to poke up. Maybe it's already full. There's not a whole lot of space to fill in this mold, so we may already be at capacity. Thinner pieces like this will also take longer to cure than larger ones. I don't know exactly the science behind it, but I think it has something to do with the temperature as it cures. Sort of acts as an additional catalyst to kick off the reaction. Use my stirring stick to just sort of coax a lot of this stuff through to some of these other parts. I definitely didn't need the full 3 ounces of material that I poured here. That is way more than will fit even in this second mold. So I'm just going to kind of scrape some of this stuff off. Probably should have had a 3rd mold handy and not been such a chumpus. Only poured as much as I needed, but you live and you learn. All right, and now we wait. That's basically all there is to it. Alexa, set a timer for 15 minutes.
15 minutes, starting now.
So in 15 minutes, I'll be able to take these and pull them out from the mold. I'm going to go ahead and pause the show, pause the stream here, and I will be back in about 12, 13 minutes to pull them out and see how we look. All right, thanks for hanging out, everybody. Before I go, if anybody has any questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer. But I'll make sure to come back and show the results, whether we succeeded and most likely failed. First tests usually do, but that's why they're tests. No, all right. In that case, thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you guys in about 10 minutes. Bye-bye. Welcome back to part 3 of our mold making series here on Make It So, Adventures in Spacecraft. We've given the resin that we just poured enough time to cure. It's already firmed up. You can see that it's turned opaque, kind of this white. And I'm going to start with this side with the test pour that I did. And you can see the silicone bends nicely away from it, and I'm able to pull away this nice copy of this piece that I made. The material itself is still nice and flexible, so I can kind of pull it away easily. I'm going to not pull too much of the flashing away because I can clean it up easier later with a knife, but it's still nice and pliable, which allows it to be released from the mold nice and easily. Oof. Make sure this guy is rock solid in there. I can't even remove the stick without breaking it, so I'm going to throw that away. That's no longer needed. And I'll remove the rest of these here in just a minute. I'm going to make sure I remove that, and then this stuff's going to have to get removed. It's already starting to pull away some of the top surface of my work surface here, so I'm going to be careful about that. There we go. Remove my clamps, and hopefully we've got a decent copy of those accessories for the Demon Blade Games Rumble in Antarctica in our mold. So very gently, I'm going to try to separate these two halves. Kind of opening along the bottom, I do see that all the way down to our bottom vents are filled, which is a very good sign. Alexa, stop. There's our timer. I want to be careful because, like I said, these things are still flexible, but I don't want to tear them. And I can see that this ring of fire didn't fill all the way, and it's threatening to split. So I'm going to tear away a little bit of this excess on the top so that it's not sticking as hard. Nice and gentle. Let's see if we can get this to separate. Ah, shoot. Well, that part broke, and we didn't get anything into the goblet, so we're probably going to need to open up the vents to that section in the future. but that's the best copy of the sword I've been able to get. Well, and the mace didn't come out at barely at all. You can see I've got huge voids. I've got huge voids where all three of the balls of the maces are supposed to be, but the vents near them look like they filled pretty well, so I'm not positive why that didn't fill. It just looks like a big air bubble got trapped in there and just didn't flow through. So like I said, I've got a pressure pot coming here next week, so hopefully on a pretty near future episode of Make It So, we'll get to test out using a pressure pot, see how that works, and see if that remedies the problem here. I'm going to take my hobby knife and very carefully remove the sword and see if the back side of it came out as good as this front face, because it looks pretty good. I am hopeful, because that's the piece I really wanted a good copy of. That looks pretty doable. That's going to work. I'm going to let this cure. Just very gently cut away some of the excess here while it's still soft. There we go. Now this little bit I'm going to let cure for probably 24 to 48 hours. The rest of this material I'm going to want to remove from the mold, just so that as it cures it doesn't damage the mold. It'll get real brittle and make it real difficult to remove later. While it's pliable, it's still a little bit easier to work. But it looks like I've got a little bit of work ahead of me to go in, open up some of these vents just a little bit more, make sure we can get stuff through. But yeah, even here I'm still seeing big air bubbles trapped inside it. So hopefully the pressure pot's going to be the answer to our woes and give us much better parts. So on future episodes, we will be painting some of these miniatures that we have. We're going to be building the custom bases. This is an example of one of the custom Arctic-themed bases. It's designed to look like ice with bones underneath with a split face, and it's using a semi-translucent resin so that eventually the whole board will be underlit and you'll be able to see underneath them. You can see one of the minis here on one of the finished bases that just needs some paint around the sides. I'll be walking through my process for building those, but if people are interested in other crafts, other skills, one of my hobbies is acquiring new and expensive hobbies and learning new making processes. I've also got a very exciting project coming up that should involve lots of different steps, from airbrushing to traditional painting to terrain building and lighting and all sorts of fun effects that I'll be sharing on this channel. But if you have other ideas, other things that you'd like to learn about, please feel free to make suggestions in the comments. And if you found this on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe to be alerted of additional streams or videos as they go up. If you found this on Twitch and watched along, please make sure to follow to make sure that you get alerts next time I'm going live. You can also follow me on Twitter at Rankinfile, or you can follow the company I work for, Very Spaceship. We not only do this show, but we do plenty of other really exciting shows on our public access streaming channel, including we just wrapped production on Monster Mornings and are making room for some very exciting new streaming shows. We've got a monthly show called the Very Very Shopping Network, in which we feature comic artists, creators, publishers, and other creative folks like that talking about their craft and showing off their cool new wares that they've got. And all kinds of other great content. So make sure to follow there. Find us on YouTube. You can follow our, if you look for Vivi Spaceship on Twitter, you can follow us there. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching and hanging out, and I will see you next time on Make It So Adventures in Spacecraft. Bye bye bye.